do this one more time. Akwesasne. 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 I don't want to butcher it, but I might. I apologize in advance. Peyton. Online camera? Online camera? Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you so much for joining us. I know Fridays are tough, but I appreciate you making the time, both in person and online. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Selene Rodriguez. I'm TPPF's campaign director for our Secure and Sovereign Nation team, where we handle all of our border security and homeland defense work here at the foundation. And I've got a really, really exciting lineup of amazing gentlemen in front of me with some incredible bios, so bear with me for just a minute as I introduce who we've got here with us today. First, Ammon Blair at the end here, our senior fellow for border security with TPPF. Most of you know Ammon. He is a 20-year Army veteran, a 10-year Border Patrol veteran, served on Operation Lone Star, and now does most of our policy work here with us. Right next to him, we've got Sheriff Benny Martinez. Sheriff Martinez has served as the Sheriff of Brooks County since 2009. He studied at Baylor University, and prior to becoming sheriff, he served as a Texas State Trooper from 1979 until he retired in 2008, retiring at the rank of sergeant. In 1990, he joined the Narcotics Service of the Department of Public Safety, which charged him with the overall direction of the state's enforcement efforts against illegal drug trafficking in Texas. Sheriff, thank you for joining us today. Oh, and importantly, he's a member of the Operation Lone Star Task Force, which is led by Sheriff Roy Boyd. Directly next to these gentlemen, we have I'm sorry, sir, I don't want to butcher your name again. Chief Swamp, who is the acting chief of police for the Akwesasne Police Service in Canada. He is a distinguished leader in Indigenous policing with 23 years of dedicated service, his entire policing career with the Akwesasne Mohawk Police Service, and he has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to his community. Chief Swamp's path to policing was shaped by his experience growing up in Akwesasne, where he witnessed too many young people being drawn into the allure of quick money. Determined to forge a different path, he chose a career in law enforcement to be a positive, contributing member of his community and to offer youth an alternative vision for their futures. As chief, he is driven by an ambitious vision to be innovative and precedent-setting in his approach to policing while working toward full equality between Indigenous police services and other law enforcement agencies. Through his leadership, Chief Swamp continues to advocate for the recognition, resources, and respect that Indigenous policing services deserve. By him, we have Chief Dwayne Zachary, Chief Peacekeeper and President of the First Nations Chief of Police. He has worked for the Kanawaki Peacekeepers since 1997 and is currently the Chief Peacekeeper and is responsible for the administration of all policing functions. In 2016, he was elected president of the First Nations Chief of Police Association, a national organization that represents standalone First Nation police services across Canada. In October 2018, he was re-elected president of the FNCPA, and in 2019, he was inducted into the Order of Merit of the Police Forces. Their primary service is law enforcement within the territory, focusing on safety, protection, and accountability as its key areas of concern. So please thank all of our panelists for being with us today. All right, so opening this up, you guys have come down from Canada to spend the week in Texas, and you did some amazing work with our Operation Lone Star Task Force this week, and so we're very grateful that all of that is finishing up here at TPPF. So I kind of want to set the stage here. Ammon, if you could please tell us, how did we get this incredible panel put before us today?
Great question. So it was actually Laura Dawson. She came down and requested that Texas Public Policy Foundation describe to her what we were dealing with in terms of the cartels and all the threats that we were facing coming in from Mexico. So she met with us here with a few Canadian emissaries. That led to me going to Ottawa, and my eyes were opened. I did not know the struggles that the First Nation chiefs and their territories were dealing with. I didn't realize that the Mexican cartels have that much of presence on their nations. I didn't realize their networks of MS-13, the Hells Angels and whatnot. And I did not realize that their communities were much like ours here in Texas. And so I was like, you know what? And they were describing to me the problems of resources, their problems with the federal government and also our federal government. Their problems with the northern border states in terms of helping them eradicate the threats in their territories. And I was like, dang, that really sounds like Texas, like what we had to go through under the Biden administration. I was like, you know what? I know some sheriffs that were dealt a heavy hand, and they were able to figure out a way to come on top and eradicate the smuggling organizations in certain regions and to help their communities be safe. And so I was like, you know what, chiefs, I got an idea. I'm going to be Sheriff Boyd's hype man, and I'm going to sell this product, and I want you guys to come down, and I want you to see exactly what we did, or not really me, what these sheriffs and law enforcement and this multi-agency task force did to do what you guys need to do and can do in your own region.
Okay, so let's get into that. Sheriff Martinez, what is the Operation Lone Star Task Force? What are you guys doing? How did you come about? And how long have you been a task force?
I think we've been around for about 36, 40 months or so. But the whole objective was to go after these cartels, go after this crime that was being committed in our highways. So what we did, though, because of the corridor, we have two different Operation Lone Star task forces. And one is on what we refer to the west side, and we used 281 as a corridor because we have several corridors. We have Highway 77, which is considered I-69 East. We have 281, which is considered I-69 West. We also have Highway 59. We have Interstate 35. We have Interstate 45. We have Interstate 10. You have all these interstates that's what they use. So the fact that the task force was created and all that, we have like 63 entities involved in this task force. So we go out there as with the main objective is to just create traffic stops, create the efforts and the presence that we're there to do what's necessary to circumvent whatever unnecessary elements are being done in times of crime.
And so shifting that, I think a lot of people don't quite always understand the problems that we're facing at our northern border. You know, Ammon and me and Sheriff Martinez, we're so used to South Texas, being from there and understanding what the cartels do and all the problems we have in the South. But there's a whole other border that we had to shift so many resources from under our previous administration that the northern border lost personnel, it lost technology, it lost intelligence capabilities. And now you guys on your side and Chief, your territory goes into both countries. So starting with you, Chief Swamp, what is it where does your territory cover between Canada and the United States, and what is it like policing that whole area when you're dealing with cross-border transnational crime?
So Akwesasne is situated in a very, very unique area. My territory covers two provinces in Canada, one New York State. New York State also covers two different counties, St. Lawrence and Franklin County. So when we're dealing with organized crime networks that commit transnational offenses, that's the mere definition of what Akwesasne faces on a daily event. We need to enhance those the networks that are dealing on both sides of the border to combat transnational offenses.
And Chief Zachary, how does the sovereignty of your nation shape your approach to policing in your territory?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in Canada, there are a number of self-administered First Nation police services, and each one of those services is providing a unique service. And I say that because each service has to provide law enforcement to a community that's different. So I know oftentimes people go, oh, well, First Nations are all the same. It's really not the case. Each one of our communities has unique realities, and the service that we provide in those communities is unique to each and every one of those communities. So in Kahnawake, our community decided that they needed to have their own policing service because the services of other police forces wasn't really what community members were looking at. So at one time we had the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Another time we had the Sûreté de Quebec, which is the provincial police service. And it didn't meet the needs of our community. And the community basically got fed up and said, it's time to make a change. And in 1979, that's what they did. They developed their own laws. So they asserted their own jurisdiction, their own sovereignty, created a Mohawk law that gave us our mandate to exist. And it's that law that we've been using to enter into agreements with the federal and provincial governments. So we get funded from them, the federal government 52% and the provincial government 48%. But those agreements fail to really answer the needs of our communities. And this is true across the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast. So we have a lot of issues. And our invitation to come here to Texas to meet with the sheriffs, to have operations with Operation Lone Star, has been really eye-opening for us. And at the same time, we were able to draw a lot of parallels about what the sheriffs here in Texas had to go through. And it's very similar to the plight that we have in Canada and in the provinces where we find ourselves located now. So the example that they have here in Texas is something that we're going to draw upon, and we'll use some of the examples that they're doing as a template for us to have discussions with our funding partners. Sovereignty for Indigenous communities is a really big deal, and it's like a nation within a nation. And I'm sure all of you here in Texas really understand that pretty well, right? And just because maybe the federal or provincial government, from our perspective, says this is what we want to do, if that doesn't meet our needs, we're going to do what we have to do for our own communities, and sometimes that means we're going to be different. That's just the reality. And I don't think the governments at the federal level or at the provincial level really understand that, and that's hurting us, and that bleeds into all of the issues that we have. So my community, even though it's not right on the border, we have effects from organized crime, right? And those organized crime networks infiltrate our communities. They take advantage of our lack of resources, and that affects national security in Canada as well as in the United States. And my perspective on this is that from this invitation that we received from the sheriffs, I think it's imperative that we start to build on these relationships and on these partnerships and start breaking down those silos, because the responsibility is on all of us. It's not to say like it's your fault or it's my fault. We have to work together. If we're gonna eradicate this problem, we need to work together.
Nothing excites me more than hearing eradicate cartels. I'm excited now. Our local Texas sheriffs here are no strangers to those problems like you're talking about. In fact, the founder of the task force, Sheriff Roy Boyd, there's an article about him called The Local Gringo. I encourage you to read it. But I said, how did you start the task force? And he said, well, the governor's office said, what kind of problems are you having? And I sent him a picture, which is in the article, of his 14-year-old son helping him detain illegal aliens who were being smuggled in his county. And he said, this is how bad the problem is. So we totally get it as a whole of society approach to really get a grasp on the problem with cartels in our communities. So Sheriff, bringing that back to you, even with the current administration taking a much bigger approach to internal enforcement, what are the biggest gaps in federal enforcement that you see right now, and how are sheriffs, especially here in Texas, filling in that void?
I think the biggest gap that we have between the state and the locals and the federal has to do with the communication barrier. We do have that. We definitely have that. And of course, objectives. For instance, in the previous administration, there were no objectives. It was just to let them come in and push forward. That's what they did. That was their narrative. But that's one of the biggest issues that we have on the communication side, and making sure that everyone is in the same path and same vision as we are in our task force. Many thanks to Governor Perry that assisted Brooks County. For instance, us in Brooks County, we have 996 bodies that we recovered of illegal immigrants that die in Brooks County, and we're only 70 miles north of the river. Okay, so we're in debt and we needed help, and the Governor Perry helped us, and then Governor Abbott helped continue to help, and then he's assisted the task force because he knows our mission is to assist Texas and make sure that we strive on what we're doing.
And you guys are doing an excellent job at that, by the way, so thank you for that. Chief Swamp, we had a discussion earlier where we were talking about how cartels have different tactics between the southern border and the northern border, but one thing for sure is they know our restrictions, they know your restrictions, and they're able to exploit that. Can you tell us what cartel recruitment looks like in your territories, or their coercion? What does that look like for you, and what strategies are working for the cartels in your area?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. That brings a very important aspect of what we're dealing with regarding organized crime in our area. I think that those different types of networks are expanding and going after our community members. And when I talk about community members, it's dealing with our young people, and that's exploiting the vulnerable persons within the community, the young people, the ones that are being financially challenged. So they recognize that as a community wide, and for sure they're expanding those gaps. So I think that we're basically behind the 8 ball on that. So some things that we need to do as a community is to basically do some education with our youth and our community members to educate them on what we're dealing with. And I don't think they fully recognize the repercussions of what their actions are. There's community members who are like-minded, and they think they're acceptable to that type of behavior, and they don't see it 7 generations ahead and how it affects our community. Yes, they do see it when members of their family get arrested and then they're incarcerated for many, many years because of their actions. And that's all as a result of the organized crime networks that are touching our young people.
Chief Zachary, you were talking about the partnerships earlier. Compared to working with other Canadian agencies, what has stood out to you so far about working here with Texas agencies?
One of the glaring differences is that when we got invited, the sheriffs met us They brought us to their operational briefings. We participated in operations. We were privy to everything that was going on, right? And that transparency really struck me because for Indigenous policing in Canada, oftentimes we're treated like second-class citizens. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but First Nation policing in Canada is not considered an essential service, right? So we are funded through programming, and First Nation police services only exist for as long as the agreement that they sign. You know, so there are some glaring issues that are out there. But coming here and having this opportunity, you know, has been really great, because I when we're having these discussions, it always strikes me as maybe not a simple solution, but the keys to it is education, and then developing our communication processes, and then building on these partnerships and actually going forward with partnerships. So for us, organized crime and their networks, they don't have any rules. They don't operate by any laws. They just go out there and do what they have to do. They're very agile. They adapt quickly. They make partnerships with other organized crime entities. Their networks are vast. And here we are sometimes, because we're treated as second-class citizens, we don't get intel, we don't get information, we're not involved when it comes time to discuss the development of certain projects that would help to hinder organized crime or to disperse it or disrupt it. You know, like these things like are shocking to me every time I think about it, because as law enforcement, we should be the example of how to develop these partnerships, but it's organized crime that's developing these vast networks, and we're always trying to play catch up with them.
No, that's a really great point. We talked earlier about the issue of how cartels use contractors and subcontractors in the United States, and how, particularly here, it makes it so much harder to go after them, especially by legal means, because you're not going after the Mexican cartel, you have to go after a chain of American citizens that the cartels are using. So Ammon, I'm gonna bring that back to you. You've worked in a lot over your career in intelligence. How effective is the current cooperation between the U.S. and Canadian authorities when it comes to going after cartel-linked organizations?
Yeah, it's not effective at all. It's the same thing. It's almost the same question you could ask us: how well are we working with Scheinbaum in Mexico? Totally different. Scheinbaum is working for the Mexican cartels. The Canadian government is not. However, there's such a lack of intelligence sharing in terms of what is happening. When I went up there and was discussing with those in Ottawa about the cartels itself, it seemed as if I was talking to them about something that only happens on Netflix and in the movie Narcos. That it's some film far out that doesn't even exist except for in cinema, when in all reality it's actually on their street and in their home. And so the information that they're talking about, the understanding or the willingness to understand, I think it's a big one. I think what the two chiefs saw from our sheriffs is that we really the first 2 hours of that operational brief was us seeking to understand from them. The first thing that Sheriff Boyd did is had those two get up there and talk, so that we could first understand, so therefore we could then be understood in terms of how we operated the same. That is the biggest issue that I'm seeing right now in terms of the Canadian government, is their refusal to understand the threats that they face. And until you actually understand those threats, any action that's going to be taken is going to miss that mark. And that those actions right now are leaving these nations behind to deal with foreign terrorist organizations, organizations that are backed by the CCP, by every imaginable threat possible. You're leaving these law enforcement personnel to try to deal with international organizations without giving them the resources. And that is all because Canada refuses to understand the threat.
which we understand what it's like having leadership that refuses to understand a threat. But something that I have really loved seeing throughout this week is how it really does start at the local level. Here in Texas, it really is the sheriffs that are playing such a large part when it comes to internal enforcement. And that's what I've learned from you two as well, talking about how you're policing in your own communities. Sheriff, why are Texas sheriffs so uniquely positioned to go after these networks here?
Well, I can say that, we do have certain sheriffs that tend to lean more toward the community, and then you have those that are, I guess, operational sheriffs. Okay, and that's what I consider myself as an operational. I have the unique fact that during my time with DPS, I got cross-trained with U.S. Customs. So I worked with Customs since 1992. That's when I started cross-trained with them. So I got to know a lot of the federal folks, the federal side, but you still have your silos that you need to deal with, because the boots on the ground are going to do the work. That's without a doubt. The work will be done. The issue will come at 2 layers up, where they're trying to figure out which direction they need to go and what's going to benefit them in terms of maybe enhancing their career with their specific entity. So that's what happens. But we do have the advantage, the fact that we're sheriffs, and we kind of have the bucket stuffs with us. It always has, and always will.
And Chief Zachary, you were telling me earlier how important it is in your territories because you are a sovereign nation, and how important it is because you know your community better than anybody else, better than federal agencies or people that come and go. What does that mean for you when you need the resources that you're lacking?
Yeah, great question. So we talked about this like every opportunity that we get. So there's nobody that's better placed than the people that are right there on the ground. And in First Nation communities, like that's us, right? That's the Ganawage Peacekeepers, the Akwesasne Mohawk Police, as well as the other 34 self-administered services. Like those officers work every single day to provide safety and security in their communities. And no one understands the culture and the language and the realities that each of those communities face. And they're all unique. And at the same time, we have, we're well aware of our limitations. And because we're well aware of those limitations, we're always seeking to develop partnerships. And like sometimes it's soul crushing when you're going out there and asking for the help and asking for the assistance and basically begging for resources in order to provide services to your community. So in each community, those chiefs of police, chief peacekeepers, those people are the experts in their communities about law enforcement and about what the realities are that the community is facing. And it's imperative that our funding partners understand that. And coming here to Texas, we were given that opportunity to explain what our reality is. And as we started to explain our reality and we started to field questions from the sheriffs that were in that room, it became clear to us as well that they had gone down this road and they're in a different place, and there's an evolution that's happening here. And that evolution is the development of different partnerships, and hopefully as things go along, it'll expand and become a bigger machine, if you will. And in Canada, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build those partnerships with federal policing, with provincial policing. We want to be recognized as equal partners, right? We want that equality. We want to be able to provide services in our community. We don't want to have to pick and choose like, oh, maybe I can do this today and maybe tomorrow I'll do that. We want to be able to answer the call for service. And that's why it's imperative to have the resources and the training and the partnerships. Like everything goes hand in hand. It's all part and parcel of the solution. And if we don't get there, then what happens, right? There's no such thing as national security without including all the partners. And that means First Nation policing is a huge part of the national security picture.
Right, I speak at events often, and one thing I always include when you're talking about who is part of this team when it comes to to your security team. And I always include tribal, and that kind of always makes people stop. What do you mean tribal? Isn't that just included in your local? But it's not. And so I really appreciate that perspective to help us kind of understand, even here in Texas, when we have to face those types of issues as well. Chief Swamp, we're talking about this partnership, which we'd love to maintain long term. And this week you had the opportunity to work not just with the sheriffs, but with the Texas Department of Agriculture, with ICE, with CBP. Where do you see the greatest potential for a long-term partnership between Texas and the First Nations leadership on this issue?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. My experience this past week has been exceptional experience, and I'm very appreciative of it. I think one area that it's already presented itself, and the opportunity is there already to expand and build from the partnership, is the training aspect. Receiving the extended invitation to join their marine operations, and I think that's a good starting point. We have a good presence with our two marine units in Akwesasne. I think that's like I mentioned, it's a very good starting point, and I think we can expand that to other different avenues to combat transnational offenses.
And coming back to you, if you could take one policy change in the U.S. that we've had this year that could help our friends here in the First Nations, what do you think that one most important factor would be?
I guess it would be kind of two. Coming up here pretty soon, we have the USMCA trade agreement that's about to happen. And we need to, one, not separate trade from security. And I think that's going to be a huge policy decision this year. Typically, our administration, past and present, has sidestepped security in order for us to feed ourselves. That's the same thing with Canada as well. Unfortunately, for Canada and for the United States, we receive a lot of our commodities from Mexico. And we are now under a trade deficit with Mexico, meaning that we now have to rely on foreign terrorist organizations to feed ourselves, both us and Canada. And because of that, we end up not doing what we should against the Mexican cartels. Yeah, we're going after Cartel de Sons and Tren de Aragua in the Caribbean, but what is being done to the Mexican cartels and their vast networks within, not just at our border, but within our communities and also in Canada. And unfortunately, we're taking a step back and allowing the cartels to continue to operate behind a sanctuary in Mexico, all because of trade and trade deficit. So I guess that would probably be my number one policy, is to now make security for all nations, Canada, the First Nations in the United States, at the forefront, and not just that trade aspect.
And you made an interesting point there with the agriculture aspect. Sheriff, it's been in the news a little bit lately how your task force is partnering with the Texas Department of Agriculture. You're doing inspection stops, and there's been an increase in drug shipments in agricultural products. What is going on there, and how does that impact not just Texas, but all the way into the interior of the United States and even into Canada?
Well, this is really nothing new in terms of them using a product to conceal the shipment of their load. It's been going back since I've been working back in the 90s. So that's how it's happened. The cartels are going to try to find ways to go. They're going back to what they used to do because they used to work. You have to understand, for the last 4 years, it was almost about human smuggling, which is a different trend. Now the trend is, okay, that's a lot harder now. Now we're going to go back to pushing the narcotics, the meth, the heroin, the cocaine. So that's just a concealment type that they have always used in terms of utilizing truck tractors. And this is why during the operation, we're always just making traffic stops, because during the traffic stop, it takes you somewhere else as a result of interviewing the person. But that is the key component, is using that visitation to conceal the narcotic.
And we've seen a decrease in fentanyl, which we're talking a lot about, but has there been an increase in anything else that we're facing here in Texas?
Well, there's been an increase in cocaine and also on meth. That's been going up.
Well, thank you for trying to find ways to get ahead of that. Chief Swamp, what do you want Americans to understand about the challenges that First Nations is facing today? We talk a lot about education and how this all comes down to really just making sure that both Americans and Canadians really understand what the problems we're facing are. So what is one thing you want our audience online and in person to take away today?
That's to me, I take that question a bit personal and home, because I think my home community of Akwesasne has always been put in that negative spotlight. When you talk about gaps in a community or gaps in border security, in many conversations that are outside of Akwesasne, and whether it's in Washington or Ottawa, Akwesasne is one of those locations that are always mentioned as a gap in the border. That's why I take that bit personal, because we're not a gap in border security. We need to really be a part of that solution, and we need to be included at the table during those discussions to address border integrity. Chief Zachary mentioned about national security. There's absolutely no national security without having Akwesasne at the table during those discussions.
A friend of mine, Leo Rios, he made the analogy in his book, Rethinking Border Security, that when you're taking on this issue, you gotta think of a football team. And you want your sheriffs, you want ICE, every agency involved in the mission is a player on your team. And what it's like right now is nobody's training together, nobody's practicing together, you all have different equipment, you all have a different playbook. And then it's game day and you all come in and there's no coordination. So I think we're all experiencing that between Texas and the US and even in Canada, it seems. But that doesn't mean that we all don't have our strengths that we're bringing to the table. It just means we need to better cooperate with those strengths. With that, Chief Zachary, what tools and what tactics are you using right now in your communities that have been effective, that you learned a lot from Texas? What is it that we could learn from the First Nations on this issue?
Great question. So in my community in Kahnawake, like we understand the ground that we're playing on, right? Like the playing field. And we understand the players there. We understand who the issues are, who the problem people are. We understand like the impacts to our community. So it's imperative that whoever the partners may be, use our knowledge and our expertise as part of the solution. So oftentimes, as Chief Swamp mentioned, like we're left out of that, and at the end of the day, the other services might say like there's a problem in this community, it's a First Nation community, they always seem to be the problem. That's not the case. The problem is that we're not properly resourced. We don't have sometimes the capability to be able to eradicate the crime that's happening in our communities. And like, if anything, I'm going to hold the federal and provincial governments responsible for that, because they're treating us like second-class citizens. They're not giving us the training we need. Sometimes we have language barriers because of different languages and the training not being available to us. All of this has to stop. It has to change. If it doesn't change, then Chief Swamp said it very well. What would the impact be? It's to national security. And national security is all of our responsibility in this room, whether it's Canada, whether it's Indigenous policing, or whether it's the United States. We have to stop pointing the fingers at each other and saying, oh, it's a problem you created. The only way we're going to solve it is if we come together and communicate and develop a strategy that's going to work for all of us, so we can, get that big win sort of thing. Because all of us, make no mistake at all of us are feeling the effects of transnational crime. It's here, it's affecting us, and it's causing great harm to Indigenous communities as well as Americans and Canadians alike.
And can you branch off of that a little bit? We know a lot of the different gangs that cartels specifically use here in Texas. What are some of those contractors that they use in your communities and in Canada as a whole?
Yeah, so we have vulnerable populations, right? We don't have a lot of resources in our community. We don't have a lot of industry. And at the end of the day, you know, people are looking to make a fast buck. People want to make money. And, you know, the allure of making fast money, a lot of money, that's exactly what organized crime wants to do. That's how they expand their networks. That's how they get you involved. Once you're involved, there's no way to get out of it, right? You're in. They're going to use you and use you and use you until there's nothing left, and they'll just go on. They don't have any obstacles. They don't have any restraints. They do what they need to do, and they do it well. They've developed vast networks of intelligence. They have so many resources. You know, like it's almost impossible for us at this point to even get into the fight because we're so under-resourced. We need to be a part of the solution. I say this all the time. Like, we're not even regarded as an essential service in our country, right? Like, what is that about? Why not? Why do we have to have all of these hindrances? In Canada, the average cost for a police officer is about $250,000 per head. But in First Nation policing, we get resourced at about $150,000 a head. Why the $100,000 gap? Like, why? We go to the same training institutions. We're doing the same type of work. In Indigenous communities in Canada, the rate of serious crime is about 6 times the national average. The rate of suicide is 10 to 12 times higher. The rate of addiction is also higher than the national average. So why are we being treated, and why are we regarded as second-class citizens in the law enforcement world? It's got to change.
Sheriff, we've talked a lot today about how cooperation doesn't always play out the way we want it to. But with your task force specifically, what does effective coordination look like when an operation is going well here in Texas?
I'll be honest with you, it's solid, simply because of the leadership we have. Everyone that's part of the task force understands what the task force is supposed to do. They understand the direction it's going to have. They have a vision. So there's no issues. If for some reason Sheriff Boyd can't be there, I can fill the gap, and it'll be the same thing. Or anyone else, if I'm not there, someone else can fill the gap, or his command staff can fill the gap. They know the vision, and that's what makes it different. That's what makes it special. If you make a cry out for something, we're coming, and we're going to come with a lot of folks, including canines. So we have those resources. Again, thanks to Governor Abbott that provided those resources for the task force.
Ammon, shifting back to you, how do transnational criminal organizations adapt their tactics when moving from high enforcement areas like in Texas to jurisdictions with more complex sovereignty and policing structures?
Yeah, we actually just saw this on the operation. We were conducting the operation. The cartels and the smuggling organizations figured out we were out there, and within hours, they started bypassing the counties that we were operating in. And in fact, one of the deputies out there went out there and got a stop and found a truck with a false wall inside the truck itself carrying illegal aliens. And so the Mexican cartel is going to just try to find a way. And if you are, say, like Operation Lone Star Task Force, or if you're the National Defense Area that's being covered through by U.S. Northcom and Pete Hegseth from California to Texas, what that does is it creates gaps for the Mexican cartels and other transnational criminal organizations to then fill that gap. And so unfortunately in Canada, I mentioned earlier that you must understand the threat before you can actually address it, because they don't necessarily either want to or refuse to do so, or do not at all understand that threat. The knowledge of how the cartels operate or what they're dealing with, whether that's the Punjabi organizations, whether that's a Haqqani network, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, regardless of the organization itself, the operation is the same. They're going to find where there's very little law enforcement, where there's little rule of law, they are going to be the rule of law. They're going to go into those enclaves, specifically a lot of times illegal alien enclaves or enclaves, especially since we had a massive invasion the last 4 years. Well, so did Canada. And so those enclaves are now going to be controlled by the whatever organization now is governing that area. And so now their allegiance, those people's allegiance now ties to, like we're seeing it right now, Al-Shabaab in Minnesota, Okay, we're seeing that allegiance tied to that organization, and so because of that, they are these organizations, cartels, Al-Shabaab, Haqqani Network, Hezbollah, the list goes down the line, are now governing and controlling territory on the United States side, and in Canada, and unfortunately also in First Nations.
Chief Swamp, looking at the evolution of the structures of these criminal organizations, do you expect their presence in Canada, including the Mohawk territories, to grow, shrink, or shift over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think for sure it's going to grow and shift. It was mentioned about how the organized crime networks adapt to law enforcement. I think that over the next few years, and it's primarily why the whole purpose why I'm here. I'm looking at different avenues and strategies to combat organized crime in my area, and I think that's how law enforcement has to do it. There's no way around it. We have to continuously adapt to organized crime units or organizations. And when we're talking about organizations, it's very unique. This past week I've learned how organizations conduct operations here. Although there's similarities, every area along the border is a little bit different. But you have to learn the ways and the means, and you have to continuously adapt to what's the current trend.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. I wish we had all day because I could sit here and keep talking about this, but we do have to move into Q&A. So do we have a microphone? Okay, Clint's walking around with a microphone. If you have a question, just raise your hand.
Hi, I have a question for our two distinguished guests from Canada. Because of the increased security on the U.S. southern border, have you seen an increase of human trafficking going either way, jihadi infiltration, or more fentanyl coming down through Canada into the U.S.? Thank you.
Sure, I could take a comment out there. So there for sure has been an increase within Akwesasne, and I can say for a fact that the actions are going both north and south. As for fentanyl, we're not seeing a whole lot of that. Not to say it's not happening, because it's for sure happening. It just depending on the different areas, because as I mentioned before about Akwesasne being the focus point and negative connotation to Akwesasne, that's there's a border here in Texas. There's cross-border crime happening here. Same thing in Akwesasne. We're not the only area that there's unmanned border in the Northern Territory.
Hey y'all. Thanks everyone again for being here. I really do appreciate being able to learn all of this. I was really curious, what, if any, differences exist between approaches and challenges at the southern border and approaches and challenges at the northern border?
I could take a say about that. So the approaches up north, of course, are going to be terrain related. So when you have the northern border terrain, like right now, we were just looking at all the pictures from the chiefs and the amount of snow that they have. When they were coming down here, the people from Canada were coming down in negative 18 degrees. And so the ways in which the organizations have to transit their illicit or licit commodities is going to be different. Then also to include how we obtain awareness of what is coming across, whether that's at the southern border, where we are able to have, whether that's aerostats, those big blimps in the air that are tied to like or tethered to what we think is a string, but certain types of technology that we can utilize here that we can't utilize up there, but also partnerships. So when we're dealing with in Mexico, it's really difficult to partner up with, say, like Sedena or the Mexican Special Forces or other organizations, when you realize that the Mexican cartels have completely taken over a lot of forms of each government at the subnational to national level. But then in Canada, it's the unwillingness to recognize that there is a threat at all. And so when you're dealing with organizations on our north that refuse to even address the situation in its entirety, then it leaves whether that's the Border Patrol or any other organizations within the United States at a standstill because we know it's cross-border, but we don't have anyone in the north that's willing to accept the efforts necessary to counter them. So there's a lot of issues also from the policy standpoint, from the strategic standpoint of that cross-border trade, as well as just that tactical level of just even understanding the tactics each organization plays out on the north or the south. So it's actually really, really, really different. Yeah.
Thanks for y'all for being here and doing this. At least a couple of you mentioned the connection between the cartel activity and national security, which seems intuitively right to me, but I'm not sure that I could articulate exactly how that happens. And I'm thinking about when I'm out talking to other folks who are not paying as close attention to these, and if you say, there's a connection here, how do I explain that in, 140 characters or less? So that people understand the severity of the threat that we're looking at here.
Great question. So we talk about this all the time. Like, how do we get people to understand that? How do we get people to understand our reality and the issues we're facing? So on the southern border as well as on the northern border, there are huge gaps, and those gaps need to be filled. And for our experience, Canada and the United States, we have to be good partners. We have to have discussions. We have to communicate. We have to educate people and tell them what the effects are. And if you look at First Nation policing and the plight that we face is being under-resourced, underfunded, not getting the training when we need to have that training, not being able to grow and expand, the retention and recruitment issues, all of these things are gaps. And I know this is a lot more than 140 words, but we have to fix those gaps. And how do we do that, right? This is a all of us problem. So for us, our federal and provincial funding partners need to fix that problem. So organized crime is very agile and it adapts very quickly. And when it sees a weakness, that's what it exploits. That's what it takes over. That's where it's going to go. It's like water finding a crack, right? And right now, Indigenous policing in Canada is a gap because we're not properly funded and we're not properly resourced. And if you use that same model and look at what's happening across the border, whether it's north and south, there are gaps and issues all across, and those need to be addressed.
I've just real quick. So one is we're at war. And unless we as Americans realize or change the definition or the mindset of what war is, we're going to continue to operate differently and not address the situation. Meaning, a lot of times when you say war, we think of World War II, we think of tanks, bombs. But that's not how the cartels think of it. So the Mexican cartels have created a Silk Road into your community. And what they're doing is, just like any foreign army, their job is to control territory. So to control your community's territory, they are going to subvert certain institutions and also subvert your society socioeconomically to make sure they govern and control that area. Once that area is controlled, that territory is controlled just like a foreign army, then they sell that to every one of our adversaries. And that is why it's a Silk Road. That is why they have a partnership with the CCP, Haqqani Network. Every one of our adversaries now has a partnership with the cartels because they have now control over U.S. territory.
I can't give you the 150-character one, but we have a 150-page paper. You are more than welcome to read on our website. I'm happy to give it to you.
Agent Blair, could you drill down on what you meant by sanctuary that we've given the cartels and how they're feeding us? So I think I know what you mean, but I want to be sure. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So in terms of, and you're talking about like in terms of agriculture. So if you look at right now our current trade deficit, you'll realize that us as Americans, we want our blackberries all year round. We love them. We love our avocados. Who here loves avocados? We all love avocados. Who here likes the avocado toast? We're in Austin, so you guys probably love the avocado toast. All right, so all that stuff to say, when you look at what Americans consume, where are we getting the items that we must consume from? And where we get those from is a majority now of Mexico. And whether that's agriculture, whether that is also our parts for your automobiles or your vehicles, you name it, is coming from Mexico. When I say sanctuary, we aren't doing anything in regards to countering the Mexican cartels. The Mexican cartels are in a symbiotic relationship with President Sheinbaum, with the federal government in Mexico, all the way down to the subnational level. Therefore, they are going to protect their economic viability of sending illicit and illicit goods into the U.S. And that protection is going to protect the organizations that move that product, which is the cartels. And they move that product for Mexico to 65 other nations. So it's not just the United States. And that's what I mean by sanctuary. The Mexican government is protecting their assets. And that asset are the cartels to move product globally.
Spice must flow.
The spice must flow.
Hi. So I'm actually a Canadian taxpayer and American taxpayer as well. So I think I can ask this question. A recurring theme among the Canadian leadership here is sort of this lack of resources, right? And I think that's been an issue as old as time, really, especially among the First Nations in Canada. If you could reallocate resources, do you think there's an opportunity to reallocate resources in any particular area within your portfolio, or do you think it's truly, is there anything that you can do, basically? And if so, where would that be? And if not, if you could get more funds for a particular program, getting really specific, what program would that be for?
Great question. I'm sorry you have to pay taxes in 2 countries. That's horrible.
That's how every Texan feels.
Listen, I absolutely believe that there's a way to reallocate funds. Now, I'm not a politician. I'm a chief peacekeeper. I want the best for my community. For me, it's about safety and security. I feel like without safety and security, it makes it very difficult to have education, housing, health, all of those things. But to your question, the Canadian government found the funds to beef up border security, right? I think it was to the tune of $1.3 billion. All of Indigenous policing in Canada receives much less than that already. So from my perspective, like funding us and helping us to get to a place where we're a functioning partner who can do the things that we need to do because we're seeing it in our communities is, to me, a rounding error for a country like Canada. So I absolutely think that there's a way to come up with these funds. I think the government sometimes looks at what Indigenous policing is doing in Canada, and they said, wow, it's like we're getting pretty good bang for our buck. Why do we have to invest more? You know what I mean? Like invariably when we go to our communities, when we ask the people who were there to serve, our report cards, if you will, are always pretty good. And that's not always the case for law enforcement. As you know, like we kind of went through that defund the police process for a long time. And for us, when it comes to Indigenous policing, like defund what? We don't have all that much. Like for us, when we do our jobs in our community, as the administrators, we always have to be very creative about the way we spend dollars. So we need to make some big changes. The First Nation Inuit policing program in Canada is failing to do the job that it set out to do. And if you go and read the Auditor General reports, many of the reports, it says the same thing. And there has been no action to change that. We asked to become recognized as an essential service for decades. In 2018, the Prime Minister gave the Public Security Minister the mandate letter to make that happen. Here we are on the cusp of 2026. We're still not regarded as an essential service. So why is that? Why is there always like a lot of dragging of the feet, right? The time for half measures and talk is over. Like we have to have actionable things to do. In our policing agreements, there used to be terms and conditions that said we could not have specialized units to do different things. We got that terms and condition removed, but no money was ever put into the coffers to do that. Very few Indigenous police services have organized crime initiatives or teams. Ganawagi Peacekeepers and Akwesasne and Mohawk Police do have them. My agreement with Public Safety Canada expires March 31st, 2026. I've been asking for a discussion about renewing that and continuing to provide those funds and to keep that partnership going, because it does have an impact on my community. It does change the quality of life in my community. And, you know, Public Safety Canada has been very non-committal about whether or not they were going to find those funds to continue that. So if these types of specialized units go away, there's an impact, and that impact won't just be felt in my community. It's going to affect Canadians, and it's going to affect Americans as well. We're neighbors, right? So we have to work together for this solution.
Can I just say something real quick? Real quick. You know what's something free? Picking up the phone and just call. Why is it that Texas had to bring down 2 chiefs for a conversation? All that it needs to be done is for Canadian government and the provincial governments to pick up their phone and call and talk. That's free. This conversation could have been free.
Well, we're very blessed that we got to have this conversation here. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed your Texas winter. From the weather you showed me earlier, it sounds like it's way preferable than the one you're having back home. We really appreciate you coming. Sheriff, thank you so much for hosting them and for all the work your task force is doing. If you could please give our guests a round of applause. And if you want to read some very long but very thorough research papers, catch me after. Thank you so much for joining us this day.